One rainy night on a deserted Los Angeles highway, a mechanic stops to help a stranded motorist with a flat tire. She refuses payment, saying only, "Just help someone else someday." Little does she know she's just helped Hollywood icon Julia Roberts, or that by tomorrow she'll lose everything she owns. But when Julia Roberts discovers the tragic turn of events, her response will change not just one woman's life, but countless others. This is how a simple act of kindness in the worst conditions can lead to extraordinary generosity that no one could have imagined. Rain pounded against Elena Rodriguez's weathered pickup truck as she drove home on the empty highway. The windshield, wipers squeaked rhythmically, fighting against the downpour. Lightning flashed across the dark sky, followed by a deep rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the very road beneath her tires. Elena yawned and rubbed her tired eyes. It had been a long day at Rodriguez Auto Repair, 12 hours of fixing. Cars changing oil and replacing worn-out parts. Her hands were rough and her back ached, but she kept going. She had to. Her twin 8-year-old boys, Marco and Miguel, were waiting for her at home. "Just 15 more minutes," Elena whispered, to herself, adjusting the rearview mirror. "Then I can kick off these boots and relax." The truck's headlights cut through the rain, showing the empty road ahead. Most people were smart enough to stay home on a night like this. The radio weatherman had called it the worst storm of the year in Southern California. As Elena rounded a curve, she noticed hazard lights flashing up ahead. A car was pulled over on the shoulder of the road. Through the rain, she could see it was much fancier than her old truck, some kind of luxury convertible with its top up, gleaming even in the downpour. For a moment, Elena thought about driving past. She was tired, she was hungry, and Mrs. Vasquez, her elderly neighbor who watched the boys, would be waiting to go home. Rich people in fancy cars usually had roadside assistance to call, but something made Elena pull over. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "We help others when they need. Hayat Mika, that's how the world should work." Elena parked her truck, grabbed her toolbox from the back and pulled her jacket over her head as she jogged toward the stranded car. "Need some help?" Elena called over the sound of the rain. A woman turned, looking surprised to see someone stopping. She was sheltering under the raised hood of the car, a futile attempt to stay dry. "My tire blew out," the woman said, pointing to the flat. "I was trying to change it, but this rain isn't making it easy." Elena nodded. Even in the poor light and rain, she could tell this was an expensive car. The woman was slender and elegant, looking, but Elena didn't pay much attention to her face. She was focused on the problem. "I'm a mechanic," Elena said. "Let me take a look." The woman stepped back, giving Elena room to work. Elena knelt by the flat tire, not caring that her jeans were getting soaked. This was just another job to her. "Do you have a spare?" Eleanor asked. The woman nodded and pointed to the trunk. "Everything's in there, but I'm not sure where the jack points are on this model." Eleanor smiled. "I can figure it out." For the next 20 minutes, Eleanor worked in the pouring rain. She found the proper jack points, lifted the car safely and removed the flat tire. Her experienced hands worked quickly despite the weather. The whole time the woman stood nearby, occasionally holding a flashlight to help Elena see better. "You're good at this," the woman said, her voice warm and appreciative. Elena shrugged as she tightened the last lug nut on the spare tire. "Been fixing cars since I was 16. My father taught me, then I went to trade school." "I'm lucky you came along," the woman said. "Could have been stuck here for hours." Eleanor lowered the car back to the ground and collected her tools. "No problem. Just make sure to get a proper tire soon. That spare isn't meant for long drives." Rain had slowed a little, but both women were soaked. The well-dressed woman reached into her purse and pulled out a wallet. "Please let me pay you for your help," she said, offering what looked like several $100 bills. Elena shook her head and held up her hand. "No need for that. Just helping out." "I insist," the woman said. "You saved me a lot of trouble." "Really? It's fine," Elena said firmly. "Just help someone else someday." The woman looked at Elena with a curious expression, then slowly put her wallet away. "Thank you," she said simply. Elena nodded, picked up her toolbox and headed back to her truck. She didn't see the woman watching her drive away, a thoughtful look on her face. Back in her truck, Elena turned the heater up high, trying to dry off a bit. Her clothes were soaked, her hands were dirty, and she was now even more tired than before, but somehow she felt good. She had done the right thing. Elena didn't know the name of the woman she had helped. She had no idea she had just changed a tire for Julia Roberts, one of the most famous actresses in history, and she certainly couldn't have guessed how this simple act of kindness on a stormy night would change her life forever. As Elena drove the final few miles home, the rain began to let up. She thought about Marco and Miguel and hoped they had finished their homework. She was looking forward to hearing about their day at school. Little did Elena know that in less than 24 hours, her whole world would come crashing down around her. Elena pulled into the parking lot of Sunset View Apartments, a plain 3-story building on the east side of Los Angeles. It wasn't fancy, but it had been home since the twins were born. She parked her truck in her usual spot and hurried to apartment 3C. When she opened the door, she found Mrs. Vasquez sitting on the couch watching a Spanish soap opera. The boys were already asleep. "Sorry I'm late, Mrs. Vasquez," Elena said, shaking rainwater from her jacket. "Got caught in the storm and stopped to help someone with a flat tire." Mrs. Vasquez smiled and gathered her knitting. "No problem, Elena. The boys finished their homework and ate the enchiladas I brought over. They tried to stay awake for you, but school tired them out." "You're a lifesaver," Elena said, walking her to the door. "I don't know what we'd do without you." After Mrs. Vasquez left, Elena quietly opened the boys' bedroom door. Marco and Miguel were asleep in their bunk beds, their dark hair tousled against their pillows. Baseball trophies and model cars lined their shelves, along with framed photos of Carlos in his military uniform. Elena felt the familiar ache in her chest. Carlos should be here to see his sons grow up. 3 years had passed since the military chaplain had come to her door, but the empty space her husband left still throbbed like an open wound. In the kitchen, Elena found a note from Mrs. Vasquez, attached to a container of leftover enchiladas. "Roof is leaking in the hallway again. Called the building manager, but no answer." Elena sighed as she looked at the ceiling. Sure enough, a small puddle was forming where water dripped through a crack. She grabbed a bucket and made a mental note to call the landlord in the morning. It was always something in this old apartment: leaky roofs, broken heaters, cracked windows. The rent was affordable, but the problems were endless. After eating her dinner, Elena sat at the kitchen table with a pile of bills. The shop's rent was due next week. The boys needed new shoes. The truck needed repairs. There never seemed to be enough money, no matter how many hours she worked. Elena pushed the bills aside and checked on her sons one more time before taking a quick shower and changing into dry clothes. In the living room, she looked at the framed photo of Carlos on the bookshelf. He was laughing in the picture, his arms around her and the newborn twins. "I'm trying my best, Carlos," she whispered. "I hope it's enough." As Elena drifted off to sleep on the couch, rain drumming against the windows, she had no idea that in just a few hours, the life she'd carefully rebuilt after Carlos's death would be completely shattered. No idea that the simple act of changing a stranger's tire would become the lifeline she and her boys would desperately need. Elena awoke to the sound of small feet padding across the apartment floor. She opened her eyes to find Marco and Miguel standing beside the couch, already dressed in their school uniforms. "Morning, Mama," they said in unison, their dark eyes, so much like Carlos's, bright with morning energy that Elena could never understand. How did children wake up so alert? "You boys are up early," Elena said, sitting up and stretching her sore back. Sleeping on the couch wasn't ideal, but she'd been too tired to make it to her bedroom. "We made breakfast," Miguel announced proudly. "Cereal and bananas," Marco added. "And we didn't spill the milk this time." Elena smiled and ruffled their identical dark curls. "My responsible little men. Thank you." The small apartment kitchen was indeed relatively clean, with 2 empty cereal bowls neatly placed in the sink. The twins had even wiped the table. Eleanor poured herself a cup of yesterday's coffee and reheated it in the microwave while the boys collected their backpacks. "Tell me about the car you fixed last night," Marco asked, his eyes lighting up. Both boys had inherited Elena's mechanical aptitude and were always eager to hear about her work. "It was a fancy convertible with a flat tire," Elena explained, checking the contents of their lunchboxes. "The lady was stuck in the rain, so I changed her tire. Did you use the pneumatic wrench? Miguel asked, already fascinated by tools. And how they worked. No, just the regular tire iron. Sometimes you have to use the basics, Elena replied, smiling at his eager expression. As they walked to the bus stop, Elena held both boys' hands, treasuring these moments. Soon they'd be too grown up to want their mother's hand in public. Remember, Mrs. Vasquez will pick you up after school today. I have to work late at the shop. Elena reminded them. Can we help at the shop this weekend? Marco asked hopefully. Yeah, Abuelo said we could be mechanics someday too, Miguel added. Elena felt the familiar pang at the mention of her father. Abuelo was right. And yes, you can help on Saturday. Someone needs to sort those spark plugs. After seeing the boys onto the school bus, Elena headed to Rodriguez Auto Repair. The small garage had been her father's pride and joy for 30 years, before his heart attack last year. Now it was hers, both the pride and the mounting troubles that came with it. The open sign flickered to life as Elena unlocked the front door. The smell of motor oil, rubber and metal greeted her, the scent of her childhood. She'd grown up in this garage, learning at her father's side, while other girls were doing whatever it was other girls did. Elena had never wanted any other life. Her father's faded photograph hung on the wall behind the counter, his broad smile and grease-stained uniform captured forever. Buenos dias, Papa, Elena whispered, touching the frame lightly as she did every morning. She booted up the ancient computer and winced at the account spreadsheet. The numbers weren't adding up the way they needed to. 3 customers had yet to pay their bills, and the shop's rent was due next week. The parts supplier was already calling about overdue invoices. Elena had taken out a small loan after her father's death to keep the business afloat, but interest was eating away at any profit. She'd been meaning to renovate the shop, maybe add a computer diagnostic station to attract newer vehicles, but there was never enough money. The bell over the door jingled as her only employee, Tomas, arrived. The older mechanic had worked with her father for decades and stayed on to help Elena despite the shop's uncertain future. "How's it looking today, boss?" he asked, donning his work shirt. Elena forced a smile. 2 oil changes, a brake job, and Mrs. Greenwood's Buick needs a new alternator. "That'll keep us busy." Tomas nodded, already moving toward the first car of the day. By noon, Elena's hands were deep in the Buick's engine. This was where she felt most at peace, solving mechanical problems that, unlike life's challenges, had clear solutions. If something was broken, you fixed it or replaced it. Simple. "Tomas," she called, "can you hand me that wrench?" The familiar rhythm of the garage carried them through the afternoon. A steady stream of customers, mostly regulars who'd been coming to her father for years, kept them busy until closing time. As Elena locked up, Tomas hesitated by his car. "Elena, I heard from my cousin who works at Jimenez Auto Body. They're looking for an experienced mechanic." "Better pay, benefits." Elena looked up sharply. "Are you leaving?" Tomas shook his head quickly. No. I was thinking of you, actually. The twins need security. The shop is struggling. We both know it." Elena's spine stiffened. "This shop is Rodriguez Auto Repair. My father built it from nothing. I'm not walking away." Tomas sighed. "Your father would want what's best for you and the boys, not this building." After he left, Elena walked through the quiet garage, running her fingers along the tools neatly arranged on the wall. Her father's voice seemed to echo among the lifts and workbenches. "Remember, Mika, it's not just cars we fix here. It's people's lives. They need to get to work, pick up their children, visit their parents. We help them do the important things." By the time Elena picked up the twins from Mrs. Vasquez's apartment, exhaustion had settled deep in her bones. "The roof is still leaking," Mrs. Vasquez said, handing Elena a container of homemade stew, "and the heat in my apartment stopped working again." "I'll call the building manager tomorrow," Elena promised, gratefully accepting the food. At home, the boys chattered excitedly about their day while Elena heated the stew. Miguel had aced his math test. Marco had scored a goal in soccer practice. Their energy was contagious, pushing aside Elena's worries temporarily. After dinner, she helped with homework, then sat between their beds for their nightly ritual. "Tell us about Dad," Marco requested, clutching his worn stuffed dinosaur. Elena smiled. "Your father could fix anything, like Abuelo. Once, his entire unit's truck broke down miles from base, while everyone else was radioing for help. Your dad had it running again with just his pocket multi-tool and some wire he found. He was a hero, Miguel said sleepily. In more ways than one, Elena agreed, kissing their foreheads. Later, alone in the kitchen, Elena sorted through bills, making impossible calculations. The shop needed $3,000 by next week, or she'd lose the lease. Her savings account held barely half that amount. She opened her laptop to check for emails from customers about payments and found one from the building manager. Rent increasing next month. New owners renovating. All tenants must reapply for units at new rate. Elena closed her eyes, remembering the woman from the rainstorm last night and her own words. Just help someone else someday. Her father had always told her that kindness would find its way back to you. I hope you're right, Papa, Elena whispered to the empty kitchen, because we could use some of that kindness finding its way back right about now. Miles away, in a hillside mansion overlooking the city lights, Julia Roberts sat in her home office, phone in hand. Claire, she said to her assistant, I need you to find someone for me, a mechanic, a woman who helped me last night during the storm. I didn't get her name, but she was driving a blue pickup truck, looked about 40, Hispanic. She refused to let me pay her. That's not much to go on, Claire replied doubtfully. Find her, Julia said, uncharacteristically serious. It's important. Elena dreamed of her father's garage. In the dream, she was a little girl again, sitting on a stack of tires, watching him work his magic on an engine. This is your legacy, Mika, he said, his hands steady and sure. Our family's heart is in these walls. The blaring sound of alarms jolted Elena awake. For a moment she was confused, thinking it was her morning alarm clock. But this sound was different, louder, more urgent. Then she smelled it. Smoke. Dios mío, the boys! Elena leapt from her bed, suddenly wide awake. The apartment was hazy with smoke, and the hallway outside her door filled with the sounds of people shouting and running. The building fire alarm screamed its warning. Elena raced to the boys' bedroom and found Marco and Miguel sitting up in their beds, eyes wide with fear. Mama, what's happening? Marco asked, coughing. We need to go right now, Elena said, grabbing their coats from hooks on the wall. Put these on, stay low where there's less smoke. The twins scrambled into their jackets, and Elena grabbed the small wooden box from her bedside table, the one containing Carlos's military medals, their wedding photo, and the boys' birth certificates. Elena took each boy by the hand, and they crouched down, moving quickly toward the front door. She placed her palm against it, not too hot. She opened it carefully and saw neighbors hurrying toward the stairwell. Everyone out, the building manager shouted, banging on doors. Fire started on the first floor. Move quickly. Eleanor and the twins joined the stream of people heading downstairs. The smoke was thicker here, making their eyes water and throats burn. Marco clutched his stuffed dinosaur with one hand and held onto Elena with the other. Miguel had grabbed his father's dog tags from his nightstand. Almost there, Elena encouraged, as they reached the second-floor landing. Outside, the night air was cold, but clear. Residents of Sunset View Apartments huddled together in the parking lot, watching as flames began to show through first-floor windows. Fire trucks arrived, sirens wailing, red lights flashing against the dark buildings. Is everyone out? A firefighter asked the building manager. I think so, the manager replied, looking at the gathered crowd. Fire started in 1B. Looks like electrical. Elena held the twins close as they watched firefighters battle the flames. The old building's wiring had always been problematic. How many times had she reported flickering lights and power surges to the building manager? Mrs. Vasquez appeared beside them, her silver hair loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual neat bun. Gracias a Dios, you're all safe, she said, patting the boys' heads. More neighbors joined their small group. Everyone had escaped, but they all watched with sinking hearts as water and smoke damaged everything they owned. Mama, all our stuff, Miguel whispered, his voice trembling. It's just stuff, Elena said, trying to sound brave. We got out safely, that's what matters. But even as she said it, Elena felt the weight of the disaster. The pictures of Carlos that couldn't be replaced, the twins' baby books, the tools her father had given her for her 16th birthday. Everything they owned was in that apartment. As dawn approached, The fire was finally contained, but the damage was severe. The first floor was gutted by flames, and water had flooded. The second and third floors. A fire marshal approached the gathered residents. "I'm sorry, but no one can go back inside right now. The structure isn't safe," he explained. "The Red Cross is setting up at the community center 3 blocks over. They'll help with temporary housing and necessities." Elena nodded numbly. She looked down at the twins, still in their pajamas under their coats, Miguel clutching his father's dog tags and Marco holding his dinosaur. The only possessions they had managed to save, besides the small wooden box Elena carried. At the community center, Red Cross volunteers handed out blankets, water, and information. They set up cots for those with nowhere else to go. "We can stay here tonight," Elena told the boys, as a volunteer showed them to 3 cots in the corner. "Tomorrow we'll figure things out." The twins nodded bravely, but Elena could see the tears they were fighting back. "Try to rest," she said, settling them onto cots. "I need to make a call." Outside the community center, Elena pulled out her cell. "Phone?" It was barely 7 a.m., but she needed to let Thomas know what had happened. "Rodriguez Auto Repair," Thomas answered, sounding confused to be getting a call so early. "Thomas, it's Elena. There's been a fire in our apartment building. The boys and I are okay, but we've lost everything. I won't be able to make it in today. Dios." "Mio, Elena. Do you need a place to stay? My sister has a spare room." Elena was about to answer when she heard a strange noise in the background. "Thomas, what's that sound? Is someone at the shop?" There was a pause on the other end. "Elena," Thomas said, his voice suddenly grave, "you need to get over here now." "What is it?" "It's the shop. The power surge from the apartment fire must have affected the whole block. There was an electrical fire here too. I came in early to finish Mrs. Greenwood's car and found it." Elena felt her legs go weak. "How bad?" "Bad," Thomas said simply. "The fire department is still here." Eleanor looked back at the community center, where her sons were finally sleeping on Red Cross cots. "I'll be there as soon as I can find someone to watch the boys." 30 minutes later, after Mrs. Vasquez had promised to stay with the twins, Eleanor stood in front of Rodriguez Auto Repair, or what was left of it. The front of the building was blackened, windows shattered. Through the broken glass, she could see that the office area was destroyed, and smoke damage covered everything. Firefighters were still clearing the scene. One approached her, helmet in hand. "You the owner?" Elena nodded, unable to speak. "Electrical fire," he explained. "Started in the back office. The good news is we contained it before it spread to the garage area. Some of your equipment might be salvageable." Elena walked through the charred remains of her father's legacy. The photograph of him that hung behind the counter was now just ashes. The computer with all their records gone. Tools and equipment were damaged by smoke and water. Thomas stood in what was left of the garage area, surveying the damage. "Insurance?" he asked quietly when Elena approached. She shook her head. "Lapsed last month. I couldn't make the payment and meant to reinstate it next week when that Parker job paid." In less than 12 hours, Elena had lost her home, all her possessions, and now her business, her father's legacy, her family's future. "What will you do?" Thomas asked gently. Elena looked around at the ruins of her life. "I don't know," she admitted, the words tasting like ashes in her mouth. "I really don't know." As she stood there, her phone rang. The display showed an unknown number. "Hello?" Elena answered, her voice hollow. "Is this Elena Rodriguez?" A professional-sounding woman asked. "Yes. My name is Claire Winters. I'm a personal assistant to someone who would like to meet with you. It's about a car you helped repair during the storm 2 nights ago." Elena almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "Look, this really isn't a good time. It's extremely important," Claire insisted. "My employer has been trying to find you. Please, could you meet today?" Elena looked around at the destroyed shop. What did she have to lose? "Fine," she said. "Where and when?" 1 week later, Elena sat on the edge of a sagging bed in the Palmetto Motel, a worn-down place on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The emergency assistance money from the Red Cross had paid for a week here, but they had only 2 days left before that ran out. Marco and Miguel were at school. Thankfully, their school had been understanding about the situation. The counselor had organized a donation drive, and several teachers had contributed clothes and school supplies. The cafeteria staff had arranged for the boys to receive free lunch. Small kindnesses that Elena appreciated more than she could say. She stared at her phone, scrolling through job listings. She'd already applied for 23 positions, 5 interviews, no offers. Too qualified, one manager had told her. You'd get bored with this position. We're looking for someone with more dealership experience, another had said. We'll keep your application on file, a third had promised, which Elena knew meant nothing. Outside the motel window, her old pickup truck sat silent in the parking lot. It had finally given up 3 days ago, the engine making a terrible grinding noise before dying completely. A mechanic without a working vehicle. The irony wasn't lost on Eleanor. She'd had to use the last of their emergency cash to buy bus passes. Now the twins had to wake up an hour earlier to catch the bus to school, and Eleanor had to navigate public transportation to get to job interviews. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Vasquez. "How are you and the boys doing?" Many neighbors found new apartments, building owner offering small compensation for damaged items. Elena sighed. The compensation wouldn't be nearly enough to replace everything they'd lost, and without a steady job, no landlord would rent to them anyway. She texted back, "We're hanging in there. Please let me know if you hear of any jobs." The motel room felt stuffy and small. 2 beds, a bathroom with a dripping shower, and a mini-fridge that hummed too loudly. Their few rescued items and donated clothes were piled in the corner. The Red Cross had given them some toiletries and gift cards for food, but those were running low too. Elena opened her wallet and counted the money again. $67. Not enough for another week at the motel, not enough for much of anything. She looked at the small wooden box sitting on the nightstand, the one containing Carlos's medals and their few surviving photos. It was the only thing of value they still had. Elena had already pawned her wedding ring to pay for the boys' new school backpacks and shoes. Carlos would have understood. He'd always said, "The boys come first, always." Her phone rang, startling. It was Coach Diaz, the boys' basketball coach from the community center. "Hey, Elena, just checking in. How are you 3 holding up?" "We're okay," Elena lied, taking it day by day. "Listen, we've got practice tonight and Saturday morning. I'd be happy to pick the boys up from school and bring them back to the motel afterward." Eleanor hesitated. She didn't like asking for help, but the twins loved basketball. It was the one normal thing left in their lives. "That would be great, Coach." "Thank you. The team misses them. Those 2 have the best 3-point shots in the league." After hanging up, Elena felt a mix of gratitude and shame. People were being kind, but she hated being a charity case. She was supposed to provide for her family, not rely on others to help them. She picked up the local newspaper someone had left in the motel lobby and scanned the classifieds again. Nothing new since yesterday. The garage couldn't be rebuilt. The landlord had already terminated her lease and was planning to convert the space into a vape shop. The equipment that survived the fire had been sold to pay off suppliers. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Elena opened it to find Tomas standing there. "Just wanted to check on you," he said, holding up a plastic bag. "Mariana made tamales." Elena smiled genuinely for the first time in days. "Come in. The boys will be sad they missed you." Thomas sat at the small table by the window, while Elena made instant coffee in the motel's tiny coffee maker. "Any luck with the job search?" he asked. Elena shook her head. "Everyone wants dealership experience or computer diagnostic certification, things I was planning to learn before." She trailed off. Tomas nodded sympathetically. "My cousin's offer at Jimenez Auto Body is still open." I applied. "They said they're fully staffed now." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Elena's situation hanging between them. "Your father would be proud of you," Tomas finally said. "The way you're handling this, not giving up." Elena felt her throat tighten. "I don't know what Papa would think about me losing his life's work." "He'd think the same thing he always did, that you're the strongest person he knew." Tomas stood to leave. "Call me if you need anything. Anything at all." After he left, Eleanor unwrapped one of the tamales and took a small bite, saving the rest for the boys. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a full meal, always making sure the twins had enough first. When Marco and Miguel returned from school that afternoon, they tried to sound cheerful as they told Elena about their day, but she could see the shadows under their eyes and the way their smiles didn't quite reach them. "Coach Diaz is going to pick you up for practice tonight," Elena told them. For the first time that week, the twins' faces lit up with genuine excitement. "Really, we can go to practice?" Miguel asked. "Yep. I figured you'd want to keep your skills sharp." Marco hugged her tightly. "Thanks, Mama." After they left with Coach Diaz, Elena sat alone in the quiet motel room. She opened the mini-fridge and took out half a sandwich she'd saved from yesterday. Dinner for one. While eating, she stared at the small stack of job rejections on the table. Tomorrow she had 2 more interviews, one at a fast food restaurant and another at a warehouse. Neither would pay enough to get them a decent apartment, but it would be something. Anything was better than nothing. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Elena sat by the window watching cars pass on the highway. She thought about her father and Carlos, how they'd both worked so hard to build something for their family. Now it was all gone. "I'm trying," she whispered into the darkness. "I don't know what else to do, but I'm trying." The twins slept peacefully, Marco clutching his dinosaur and Miguel with his father's dog tags under his pillow. They deserved so much better than this. Elena finally lay down on her bed, exhaustion overtaking her. As she drifted towards sleep, her phone buzzed with a text message. "Ms. Rodriguez, this is Claire Winters again. My employer is still very interested in meeting with you. Please reconsider. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Café Bella on Wilshire. It could be important for your future." Elena stared at the message. She'd ignored Claire's calls after that first conversation, assuming it was either a scam or someone wanting their car fixed when she no longer had a garage. But tomorrow's warehouse interview wasn't until 2 p.m. "I'll be there," she texted back, not knowing what else to do. At this point, what did she have to lose? As Elena finally fell asleep, she couldn't know that miles away in a Beverly Hills mansion, Julia Roberts was reviewing a folder her assistant had compiled. "Are you sure this is her?" Julia asked, looking at a DMV photo of Elena. "Positive," Claire replied. Elena Rodriguez, 38, widow, twin sons. Owned Rodriguez Auto Repair until the fire last week. Lost everything, home and business. Julia closed the folder, her expression determined. "Make sure everything's ready for tomorrow. The coffee shop is confirmed. Private room in the back." Julia nodded. "Good. And the other arrangements?" "In progress, just as you requested." "Perfect," Julia said softly. She helped me without a second thought. Now it's my turn. The next morning, Eleanor stood outside Café Bella, wondering if she was making a mistake. The upscale coffee shop on Wilshire Boulevard seemed worlds away from the Palmetto Motel. She'd dropped the twins at school with the promise of picking them up early for ice cream, assuming she could scrape together enough change for even that. Small treat. Elena glanced down at her outfit, jeans and a button-up shirt, both donated by her church's assistance program. She'd tried to look presentable, but she felt out of place among the well-dressed professionals entering the cafe. "Just get this over with," she muttered to herself, pushing open the door. The interior was modern and sleek, exposed brick walls, hanging plants, and the rich aroma of expensive coffee. Eleanor approached the counter, searching for someone who might be Claire Winters, Ms. Rodriguez. A polished woman in her 30s approached, extending her hand. "I'm Claire, thank you for coming." Eleanor shook her hand. "I'm still not sure why I'm here." Claire smiled. "My employer will explain everything. We have a private room in the back." As they walked through the cafe, Eleanor felt increasingly uneasy. Who went to this much trouble to talk about a car repair? Claire led her to a small room separated from the main area by frosted glass doors. "Can I get you a coffee? Something to eat?" Elena hesitated. She hadn't had a proper breakfast, saving the last of their food for the twins' lunch. "Just coffee is fine, I'll be right back." Alone in the room, Eleanor noticed how comfortable it was. Plush chairs, a small table with fresh flowers, soft music playing. The wall displayed black and white photographs of old Hollywood. She was studying a photo of Audrey Hepburn when the door opened. Elena turned, expecting Claire with the coffee. Instead, Julia Roberts walked in. Elena froze, unable to process what she was seeing. The woman from the rainstorm, the stranded motorist, whose tire she'd changed, was Julia Roberts. "Hello, Elena," Julia said warmly, closing the door behind her. "It's so good to see you again." Elena stood speechless as recognition dawned. The rain and darkness had obscured the woman's features that night, and Elena had been focused on the tire, not the driver's face. But now, in the clear light of day, there was no mistaking one of the most famous actresses in the world. "You're—" Elena finally managed. "The woman whose tire you changed in the pouring rain." Julia smiled. "Yes, please, sit down. Claire will be back with coffee." Still stunned, Elena sank into a chair. Julia took the seat across from her, elegant in simple jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than Elena had made in a month at the garage. "I wanted to thank you properly," Julia continued. "You wouldn't accept payment that night, and you drove away before I could even get your name." Elena found her voice. "I didn't recognize you. I was just helping someone who needed it." "Which makes it even more special," Julia said. "You didn't help me because I'm Julia Roberts. You helped me because I was a person stranded in the rain." Claire entered with a tray carrying coffee and a selection of pastries. She set it down and quietly left, closing the door behind her. "I've been trying to find you for days," Julia explained, pouring coffee for them both. "It wasn't easy. Female mechanic. In a blue pickup isn't much to go on. Then we located your shop only to discover there had been a fire." Elena wrapped her hands around the warm coffee mug. "There were 2 fires, actually. My apartment building and then the shop. We lost everything." Julia's expression softened with genuine concern. "I heard. I'm so sorry, Elena. That's actually why I wanted to meet with you. Please, have something to eat. You look like you could use it." Too hungry to be proud, Elena took a croissant. "I'm not looking for charity, Ms. Roberts. Julia, please. And this isn't about charity. This is about one human being helping another." She leaned forward. "You did something kind for me without expecting anything in return. Now I'd like to help you if you'll let me." Elena took a bite of the croissant, savoring the buttery layers. "I don't understand what you're offering." The door opened again and 2 young boys burst in, followed by an apologetic Claire. "Mama!" Marco shouted, rushing toward Elena. "I'm sorry," Claire said quickly. "They arrived at the front desk saying they were your sons. The school called and said they were sick." Elena stood immediately. "Boys, what happened? You're supposed to be in school." Miguel looked up sheepishly. "We told the nurse our stomachs hurt." "But we're not really sick," Marco added. "We just wanted to make sure you were okay. Mrs. Vasquez texted us you were meeting. Someone important." Elena glanced at Julia, embarrassed. "I'm so sorry about this." To her surprise, Julia was smiling warmly. "Don't apologize. You must be Marco and Miguel." The twins' eyes widened as they recognized her. "You're Julia Roberts," Miguel exclaimed. "From Wonder," Marco added. Julia laughed. "That's me. I'm having a meeting with your mum. Would you like to join us? There are chocolate croissants." The boys looked at Elena for permission. She nodded, still confused about this surreal situation. As the twins settled in, demolishing pastries with the endless appetite of 8-year-olds, Julia watched them with a gentle expression. "They're wonderful, Elena. You've done an amazing job." "Thank you," Elena said, watching her sons' faces light up as they asked Julia questions about movies and Hollywood. "Do you really know Wonder Woman?" Miguel asked through a mouthful of chocolate. "Gato, I do," Julia confirmed. "She's very nice." "Cooler than Spider-Man," Marco pressed. "That's a tough call," Julia said seriously. "They're both pretty cool." Watching her sons interact so naturally with Julia Roberts, of all people, Elena felt a wave of unreality. How had changing a tire in the rain led to this moment? After the boys had eaten their fill, Claire offered to show them the cafe's display of antique coffee grinders, giving the adults a chance to talk. "They're amazing kids," Julia said once they were alone again. "They're everything to me," Elena replied, "which is why I need to get back on my feet. I have a job interview this afternoon." "At Warehouse World? Night shift receiving clerk? When?" Elena looked surprised. Julia smiled. "Claire is very thorough. It's not exactly using your skills as a master mechanic. It's a job. We need money, not dreams right now. Julia nodded thoughtfully. What if you could have both? Money and dreams. What?
Do you mean?
I've been thinking about this since the night you helped me. Julia leaned forward. I don't want to just write you a check, Elena. That's not a solution. I want to help you rebuild. Elena shook her head. The garage is gone. The landlord, not, in the same location. Somewhere new, something better. Julia's eyes were bright with conviction. A new garage with modern equipment. Your name on it, your business. Elena stared at her. That would cost a lot of money. Julia smiled. Yes, but I have a lot of money, and I'd rather invest it in someone like you than another vacation home. Why would you do that for me? Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because when I was stranded in the rain, you stopped to help me when others drove by. Because you refused payment and just asked me to help someone else someday. Julia reached across the table and squeezed Eleanor's hand. This is my someone else someday. Eleanor felt tears threatening. She blinked them back, unwilling to break down in front of this woman who was offering her a miracle. I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider it, Julia replied. This isn't charity, Elena. It's an investment in you, your skills, and your boy's future. The twins returned with Claire, their eyes wide with excitement from whatever they'd seen. Mom, they have a coffee machine that's older than Abuela, Marco announced. Elena looked at her sons, truly happy for the first time in weeks, then back at Julia Roberts, who was watching her with quiet understanding. I need to think about this, Elena said finally. Julia nodded. Of course, take all the time you need. As they prepared to leave, Julia handed Elena a business card with a handwritten number. Call me when you decide, and Elena, that warehouse job will still be there if you want it, but I think you were meant for more. Walking out of the cafe, with a boy on each hand, Elena felt dizzy with possibility. The card in her pocket seemed to burn with potential. Was that really Julia Roberts, Mama? Miguel asked. Yes, mijo, that was really her. Why does she want to help us? Marco wondered. Elena looked down at her sons, thinking of a rainy night, and a simple act of kindness. Because sometimes, she said, when you help someone, it comes back to you in ways you never expected. Elena paced the length of the motel room, Julia's business card between her fingers. 3 days had passed since their meeting at Café Bella. 3 days of wrestling with pride, hope, and disbelief. What do you think, Carlos? She whispered to the empty room. Is this crazy? Accepting help from Julia Roberts? The twins were at school, giving Elena space to think. She'd missed the warehouse interview, unable to focus on a minimum wage job, when a lifeline had been unexpectedly thrown her way. Her phone rang, Mrs. Vasquez checking in as she did daily. Have you called her back yet? The older woman asked. After Elena explained the situation, no, it feels wrong somehow, like I'd be taking advantage. Mrs. Vasquez clicked her tongue. Mija, when a door opens, you walk through it. Your father would say the same. After they hung up, Elena stared at the card again. Finally, she dialed the number. Julia Roberts' office, Claire answered. This is Elena Rodriguez. Julia asked me to call when I decided. One moment, please. There was a brief pause, then Julia's warm voice came on the line. Eleanor, I'm so glad you called. I've been thinking about your offer, Eleanor said carefully. It's incredibly generous, but you're not comfortable accepting such a big gift, Julia finished for her. I understand. That's why I'd like how to explain my idea more thoroughly. Can you meet me this afternoon? 2 hours later, Elena found herself in the passenger seat of Claire's BMW, driving through an industrial area in East Los Angeles. They pulled up to a building with a "For Lease" sign in the window, a former auto repair shop by the looks of it. Julia was waiting outside, dressed casually in jeans and a baseball cap, sunglasses hiding her famous face. What do you think? Julia asked as Elena got out of the car. Elena surveyed the building, larger than her father's garage, with 3 bay doors and a spacious front office area. The location was good, near the freeway and several residential neighborhoods. It's perfect, she admitted, but I don't understand. Let me explain inside, Julia said, unlocking the door with a key she already possessed. The interior was empty but clean, with concrete floors and high ceilings. Industrial fans hung overhead, and there was a small office area with a counter. 4 customers. Julia led Elena to the center of the space. When I was starting out as an actress, I was broke in New York. One winter night, my heat went out. The super was gone, and I couldn't afford a repairman. An elderly neighbor fixed it. For me, refused payment. Just said, we take care of each other. I never forgot that. Eleanor leaned against a wall, listening. Success came, and I promised myself I'd pay that kindness forward when I could, Julia continued. But not in the usual celebrity charity way. I wanted to make real differences for real people. She smiled. That's where you come in. I still don't understand why me, Eleanor said. You barely know me. I know enough, Julia replied. I know you stopped to help a stranger in the rain when others drove by. I know you're raising twin boys alone after losing your husband. I know you worked alongside your father in his garage and took over when he passed away. Claire's research is very thorough. Eleanor wasn't sure whether to be impressed or concerned about how much Julia knew. Here's my proposition, Julia said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. So this isn't a gift, it's an investment. I'll purchase this building and the equipment you need. I'll provide startup capital to hire help and advertise. You'll run the business, Rodriguez Family Garage. Not my name, yours. That's still an enormous gift, Elena protested. Not a gift, a business arrangement. Julia handed her a folder. This outlines everything. I'll be a silent investor. You'll make the decisions, do the work, build the customer base. As the business becomes profitable, you'll gradually buy back my share. Elena opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. It was all there. Detailed plans for purchasing the building, lists of equipment, projections for business growth, and a clear path for Elena to ultimately own everything outright. This is... Elena struggled to find words. Fair, Julia supplied. It gives you what you need right now, a fresh start, but also respects your pride and independence. You're not receiving charity, you're receiving an opportunity. Elena walked around the empty space, imagining it filled with lifts, tools, and cars. She could almost hear her father's voice. Never be too proud to accept a hand up, Mika. Just make sure to offer your hand to others when you're standing tall again. There's something else, Julia said, pulling out her phone. She showed Elena photos of a small house, modest but cheerful, with a yard and 3 bedrooms. It's 6 blocks from here, currently for rent, but the owner is willing to sell. Part of my investment would include securing this for you and the boys. Elena felt overwhelmed. Julia, this is too much. Is it? Julia challenged gently. What would you do if our positions were reversed? If you had the means to help someone who deserved a second chance? The question hung in the air between them. I'd help, Eleanor admitted quietly. Exactly. Julia touched Elena's arm. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Why shouldn't some of it go to someone like you? Elena looked around the garage again, allowing herself to imagine the possibilities. A stable home for her boys, a business to rebuild, her father's legacy continuing. There's a catch, isn't there? She finally asked. Julia smiled. Just one. You have to promise to help someone else when you're back on your feet. Not me. I don't need anything. Someone who does. Pay it forward, Elena murmured. Exactly. A car horn honked outside, Claire reminding them of the time. I need to pick up the boys from school, Elena said. Of course. Julia handed her the folder. Take this. Read through everything. Talk to a lawyer if you want. I'll cover the cost. Think about it, but Elena... Their eyes met. Don't let pride rob your sons of this opportunity. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is accept help. Outside, as Claire prepared to drive Elena back to the motel, Julia made one last comment. The boys mentioned they play basketball. There's a court at the community center near that house. She grinned. Just saying. That evening, after the twins were asleep, Elena spread the documents across the motel bed. The details were astonishing. Julia had thought of everything. Equipment, lists based on industry standards, salary projections for Elena and 2 employees, marketing budgets, insurance costs, even a college fund for the twins, tucked discreetly into the financial section. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Julia. No pressure, but if you're ready to say yes, I have contractors standing by to begin renovations tomorrow. The house, Owner is also eager to close the deal. Elena looked at her sleeping sons, remembering how their eyes had lit up when they met Julia. They deserved stability, a home, a chance to grow up without constant worry. She thought about her father and Carlos, both, men who had worked hard to build something meaningful. This wasn't the path she'd imagined, but perhaps it was the one she needed. Elena picked up her phone and typed a simple response. Yes, and thank you. Julia's reply came seconds later. No, thank you for stopping that night. Meet me at the garage. Tomorrow at 9. We have work to do. For the first time in weeks, Elena fell asleep with hope warming her chest. Tomorrow wouldn't be just another day of struggle. Tomorrow would be the first day of rebuilding, and someday when she was standing tall again, she would remember to offer her hand to someone else who needed it. The transformation began immediately. The day after Elena accepted Julia's proposition, contractors arrived at the garage space. What had been an empty shell quickly filled with the sounds of construction, drills whirring, hammers pounding, voices calling instructions. Elena stood in the center of it all, clipboard in hand, directing the renovation. Julia had insisted that all decisions be Elena's, from the layout of the service bays to the color of the waiting area walls. It's your garage, Julia had said. I'm just the investor. 2 weeks into the renovation, Elena arrived early to find Thomas waiting outside, hat in hand. Heard you might be hiring, he said, a hopeful smile on his weathered face. Elena grinned. I might need an experienced mechanic who knows his way around older models. Know anyone who fits that description? By the end of the day, Tomas was helping design the tool storage system. His presence made the new garage feel connected to her father's legacy. The house renovation proceeded simultaneously. The modest 3-bedroom home needed little work. Fresh. Paint, minor repairs, updated appliances. Julia handled these details personally, consulting Elena on choices but taking care of the logistics herself. Focus on the garage, she told Elena. That's your expertise. Let me worry about the house. 1 month after that rainy night roadside encounter, Elena and the twins stood on the porch of their new home, key in hand. Is it really ours, Mama? Miguel asked, eyes wide. It will be, Elena answered, thinking of the carefully structured payment plan Julia had created. We're going to take care of it, and someday it will belong to us completely. The boys raced inside, exploring rooms that seemed palatial after the motel. They each had their own bedroom, a first in their young lives. The backyard, though small, offered space to play and a patch of earth where Elena planned to teach them to grow vegetables, as her father had taught her. That evening, as the twins settled into their new beds, Elena sat on the porch swing Julia had installed as a housewarming gift. The spring air was soft, carrying the scent of jasmine from a neighbor's yard. Her phone buzzed with a text from Julia. How's the first night in the new casa? Elena smiled, typing back, the boys are ecstatic. I don't think they believe it's real. Yet, neither do I. Believe it, came the reply. You earned this second chance. Use it well. The garage renovation took longer, as proper equipment installation required precision. Julia spared no expense, purchasing top-of-the-line diagnostic computers, lifts and tools. When Elena expressed concern about the cost, Julia waved it away. Better equipment means better service, which means more customers and faster repayment, she explained with business-like practicality. But Elena suspected the actress simply enjoyed the project, creating something meaningful rather than just writing a check to charity. Julia visited regularly but always discreetly, wearing her baseball cap and sunglasses. She wanted the focus to remain on Elena and the business, not on her own celebrity involvement. Word spread through the community nonetheless. Mrs. Vasquez told her church group, who told their families, who told their co-workers. By the time Rodriguez, Family Garage was ready to open, a list of potential customers had already formed. The day before the grand opening, Eleanor arrived to find a delivery truck outside the garage. Inside was a large wooden sign, Rodriguez Family Garage, carved in bold letters, with Esther 1987 beneath it, the year her father had opened his original shop. A note attached read simply, "Every legacy deserves to continue." J. Eleanor traced the carved letters, tears blurring her vision. It wasn't just a sign. It was recognition that this new beginning was also a continuation. Later that afternoon, as final preparations were underway, a plain van pulled up. The driver unloaded a framed photograph, Elena's father in his work shirt, smiling proudly in front of his original garage. The picture Elena thought had been lost forever in the fire. "How did you find this?" Elena asked Julia when she called, to thank her. "Claire discovered that the local newspaper had done a feature on your father years ago when he won a Community Business Award. We tracked down the photographer who still had the original." That night, Elena hung the photograph in the office of the new garage, directly across from where customers would stand. Her father would be watching over everything. The grand opening day dawned clear and bright. Elena arrived early, wanting a quiet moment before the chaos began. She found Thomas already there, arranging tools with the precision of an artist. "Couldn't sleep," he explained. "Too excited." By 10 o'clock, a small crowd had gathered outside. Neighbors, former customers from her father's garage, Mrs. Vasquez and her church friends, Coach Diaz, and some of the boys' basketball teammates. Elena's new neighbors had brought food, turning the opening into an impromptu block party. Julia arrived without fanfare, slipping in through the back entrance. "This is your moment," she insisted when Elena tried to introduce her to people. "I'm just here to support you." But the twins had other ideas, proudly introducing Julia to everyone as our friend who believed in Mama. Julia accepted this role gracefully, redirecting conversations back to Elena's skill as a mechanic whenever possible. Local media arrived, a development Elena later learned Julia had quietly arranged through contacts. The East Los Angeles Tribune ran a feature on the new woman-owned business, highlighting Elena's journey from her father's apprentice to business owner. What the article didn't mention was Julia's involvement. The actress had been clear with the reporter, "This story isn't about me, it's about a skilled professional rebuilding after tragedy." By day's end, Rodriguez Family Garage had appointments, booked for 3 weeks solid. Thomas was training a young apprentice Elena had hired, a woman from the local technical college who reminded Elena of herself 20 years earlier. As the last customers left and the twins played basketball with neighborhood children in the garage parking lot, Julia found Elena in the office, staring at her father's photograph. "What would he think of all this?" Julia asked softly. Elena smiled. "He'd say I got lucky, and that I'd better not mess it up." "You won't," Julia said with certainty. "This place is already special, you can feel it." They stepped outside to watch the impromptu basketball game. The neighborhood kids had mixed with the twins seamlessly, forming teams and creating rules with the easy adaptability of childhood. "A month ago they had nothing," Elena said, watching her sons. "Now look at them." "That's the thing about community," Julia replied. "It can be rebuilt anywhere if you have the right foundation." She glanced at Elena. "You're that foundation. I just provided the materials." As sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Elena looked around at what had been created. Not just a business or a home, but a fresh start, a continuation of her family's legacy and the beginning of something new. "Thank you," she said simply to Julia, "not just for the garage and the house, for believing this was possible." Julia smiled, watching the children play. Sometimes all people need is for someone to see their potential and give them a chance to rebuild everything else they do themselves. As if to punctuate her words, Miguel made a perfect three-point shot, and cheers erupted from the impromptu court. Community, Elena realized, wasn't just about place. It was about connection, opportunity, and the courage to begin again. 3 months. After Rodriguez Family Garage's informal opening day, Elena stood in front of a mirror, adjusting the collar of her new navy blue work shirt. Embroidered on the chest was the garage's logo, a stylized wrench with Rodriguez Family Garage curved around it. The shirts had been Julia's idea, part of creating a professional brand identity for the business. Today was the official grand day. Opening celebration, a bigger affair than the initial opening, with catering, a ribbon-cutting ceremony, and even a local radio station broadcasting live from the parking lot. Elena had resisted at first, uncomfortable with such attention, but Julia had been persuasive. "Hey, it's not about showing off," she'd explained. "It's smart business. People remember events, they tell friends. Word of mouth is the best advertising a local business can get." The twins burst into Elena's bedroom, already wearing their matching mini versions of the staff shirts. "Mama, people are already lining up outside," Marco exclaimed. "Miss Julia is here too," Miguel added. "She brought donuts for everyone." Elena smiled. In the months since accepting Julia's help, the actress had become more than a benefactor. She'd become a friend. The twins adored her, and she treated them with genuine affection, remembering details about their basketball games and school projects. "Let's not keep everyone waiting, then," Elena said, giving herself one final glance in the mirror. The woman looking back was different from the one who had stopped to help a stranded motorist in the rain 6 months ago. The exhaustion and worry had faded from her eyes, replaced by confidence and purpose. She was still Elena Rodriguez, still a mechanic, still a mother, still her father's daughter, but she was also something new, a business owner with a future ahead of her. The garage. Parking lot had been transformed for the occasion. A red ribbon stretched across the bay doors. Chairs were arranged in neat rows. A table laden with refreshments stood to one side, surrounded by neighbors and community members helping themselves to coffee and pastries. Julia met Elena at the back entrance, dressed casually but elegantly, in a way that somehow didn't call attention to herself. "Nervous?" she asked. Elena nodded. "A little. Public speaking isn't exactly my specialty." "Just speak from the heart," Julia advised. "Tell them your story. The rest will follow naturally." As Elena moved toward the front of the gathering, she spotted familiar faces. Mrs. Vasquez beaming proudly in the front row, Coach Diaz with several members of the twins' basketball team, Tomas and his wife, even some of her father's old customers who had already become regular clients of the new garage. Less expected were the strangers, men and women in business attire, who Julia later explained were industry contacts, potential commercial clients who maintained fleets of vehicles. Claire had quietly arranged their attendance, knowing such contracts could cement the garage's long-term success. At precisely 10 o'clock, the local Chamber of Commerce president stepped forward to begin the ceremony. "Today we celebrate not just the opening of a business, but the resilience of the human spirit," he began. "Rodriguez Family Garage represents the best of our community, determination, expertise, and the courage to begin again after loss." After his introduction, Elena stepped forward. Looking out at the supportive faces, her nervousness faded. "6 months ago, I lost everything," she began simply. "My home and my father's garage were destroyed in the same night. I thought his legacy and my family's future had gone up in flames." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "What I didn't know was that a chance encounter would change everything. A few nights before the fire, I stopped to help someone with a flat tire in the rain. I didn't know it was Julia Roberts. I was just helping someone who needed it, the way my father taught me." Eyes turned to Julia, who smiled encouragingly from the side of the gathering. "When Julia learned about what happened to my family, she could have simply written a check. That would have been generous. Instead, she chose to invest, not just in a business, but in people. In me, in my skills, in my son's future, and in this community." Elena gestured to the garage behind her. "Rodriguez Family Garage isn't charity. It's a partnership built on mutual respect. Every service we provide, every car we repair, brings me one step closer to full ownership. Julia gave me the opportunity, but my team and I are doing the work." She introduced Tomas, her new apprentice Gabriela, and the part-time administrative assistant who helped manage the growing business. "My father believed that fixing cars wasn't just about engines and parts. It was about helping people move forward in their lives. That's the legacy we're continuing here. When you bring your vehicle to Rodriguez Family Garage, you're not just a customer, you're part of our community." With that, Elena cut the red ribbon to enthusiastic applause. The bay doors rolled up, revealing the immaculate shop floor with its state-of-the-art equipment and Julia's surprise addition, a wall of photographs showing the original Rodriguez garage, Elena's father teaching her as a child, and Elena's own journey as a mechanic. The celebration continued throughout the day. Local families brought their cars for free safety inspections. Children enjoyed the bouncy castle Julia had arranged. The twins proudly gave tours of their garage to friends. From school, Elena found a quiet moment to escape to the office, overwhelmed by the day's emotions. She stood before her father's photograph, straightening it unnecessarily. "We did it, Papa," she whispered. "Different than you would have done it, maybe, but we kept your name going." A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Julia stood in the doorway. "Everything okay?" she asked. Elena nodded. "Just taking a moment. It's a lot to process." Julia came to stand beside her, looking at the photograph. "He would be proud, you know." "I think he would," Elena agreed, "though he might have been suspicious." "Of Hollywood money," they both laughed, the tension breaking. "I have something for you," Julia said, handing Elena an envelope. "Consider it a grand opening gift." Inside, Elena found documents transferring 20% ownership of the garage building to her name. "This isn't in our agreement," Elena said, confused. "I'm not supposed to start buying back ownership until next year." "Consider it an acceleration." "Of the timeline," Julia replied. "You've exceeded all the projections. The garage has been profitable from day one thanks to your reputation and hard work." Elena started to protest, but Julia held up a hand. "This isn't charity, remember? It's business, good business. And speaking of business..." She gestured toward the door where Claire was waiting with a distinguished-looking man in a suit. "This is Michael Brennan, head of operations for Pacific Film Transportation. They maintain 50 vehicles for production companies across Los Angeles, and they're looking for a new service provider. Someone reliable, detail-oriented, and discreet." Elena's eyes widened at the implication. "I might have mentioned you do excellent work," Julia added with a wink, "but the contract will depend entirely on your bid and your capabilities." As Elena stepped forward to meet the potential client, Julia slipped out, letting her take the lead. This was Elena's domain now, her expertise, her business. Outside, Julia found the twins showing off the hydraulic lift to their friends. "Is Mama going to be famous now?" Marco asked when he spotted her. Julia smiled. "No, but she's going to be successful, that's better." Miguel considered this. "Because she helped you that night in the rain?" "No," Julia corrected gently. "Because she's skilled and hard-working. I just helped clear the path a little." 6. Months after the grand opening, Rodriguez Family Garage was thriving beyond Elena's wildest expectations. The Pacific Film Transportation contract had been just the beginning. Word spread through the industry about the garage that treated every vehicle, from luxury cars to work trucks, with the same meticulous care. Elena had hired 2 more mechanics and extended their hours to accommodate demand. Thomas had taken on the role of mentor, training young mechanics with the same patience Elena's father had once shown her. The apprentice program Elena created with the local technical college had become a source of pride, especially because she prioritized female students who, like her once, faced skepticism in the male-dominated field. On a busy Thursday afternoon, Elena was deep under the hood of a vintage Mustang when Gabriella called from the front office. "Someone here to see." "You, boss, says it's urgent." Elena wiped her hands on a shop rag and headed to the office, where a harried-looking man in his 30s waited, a sleeping toddler in his arms and a school-aged girl clutching his leg. "Mr. Alvarez." Elena recognized him vaguely. He'd brought in a battered Honda once for an oil change. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm sorry to bother you," he began, his voice strained. "My car broke down on the freeway, smoke coming from the engine. I managed to get it to the shoulder, then called a tow truck. They brought it here because I remembered your shop." Elena nodded. "I'll take a look right away." "That's just it," Mr. Alvarez said, shifting the sleeping child to his other shoulder. "I can't afford repairs right now. I just started a new job after 6 months unemployed. My wife's in the hospital, complications after our son was born. I need the car to get to work, take my daughter to school, visit my wife." He trailed off, clearly embarrassed. "I was hoping maybe a payment plan." Elena studied the man. The exhaustion in his eyes reminded her of her own reflection in the motel mirror all those months ago. "Let me look at your car first," she said. "Then we'll figure something out." The Honda in the lot was in worse shape than Elena remembered. When she popped the hood, the problem was immediately apparent: a blown head gasket, likely from overheating. A major repair, and one this car had probably needed for some time. Inside, Mr. Alvarez sat in the waiting area, his daughter coloring with crayons Gabriela had found for her, the toddler still asleep against his chest. "It's the head gasket," Elena told him. "Honestly, the repair will cost more than the car is worth." The man's face fell. "I understand. Thank you for looking." As he stood to leave, Elena made a decision. "Wait. When do you need to be at work tomorrow?" 8 o'clock. It's a warehouse job in Commerce." Elena nodded. "I have a loaner car you can use while we figure this out, and I'll drive you home today." The relief on his face was immediate and profound. "I can't thank you enough. I'll pay you back, I promise." "I know you will," Elena said. "Just help someone else someday." The words, the same ones she'd spoken to Julia that rainy night, echoed in her mind as she arranged the loaner car and drove the grateful family home. That evening, as the garage quieted for the night, Elena called Julia. They spoke regularly, though the actress's busy schedule meant their conversations were often brief. "You did what?" Julia asked when Elena explained about Mr. Alvarez. "I know it's not great business sense," Elena admitted, "but you should have seen him, Julia. 3 kids, wife in the hospital, just getting back on his feet." "I'm not questioning your decision," Julia clarified. "I think it's wonderful. I'm just surprised you have a loaner program. That wasn't in our business plan." Elena laughed. "It's not a program. It's my old truck. Tomas and the twins rebuilt the engine as a project last month." There was a pause on the line. When Julia spoke again, her voice was warm with approval. "You're paying it forward." "I had a good teacher," Elena replied. The next morning, Elena arrived early at the garage to find Tomas already there, examining Mr. Alvarez's Honda. "What are you doing?" she asked. Tomas straightened. "Gabriela told me about this family situation. I was thinking, we've got that engine from the Mendez job. Customer decided to replace the whole car rather than repair the engine. It's the same model, just newer." Elena saw where he was going. "You think we could swap it in?" "With some modifications." "Yes, and I've got a nephew who works at the junkyard. He could find us the other parts we need at cost." A slow smile spread across Elena's face. "How long would it take?" "A few days. Gabriela and I could work on it after hours." By the time Elena arrived home that evening, a plan was in motion. The boys were already plotting their contribution. "We can clean the inside of the car, Mama," Marco suggested. "Make it nice for the family." "And fix that broken radio," Miguel added. "We learned about circuits in science class." Elena hugged them both. "When did my sons become so thoughtful?" "We learned from you," Marco said with the straightforward honesty of childhood. Over the next week, Rodriguez Family Garage transformed. During business hours, it operated normally, servicing regular customers. After closing, it became a humanitarian mission. Tomas and Gabriela worked on the engine swap. The twins, supervised by Elena, cleaned and detailed the interior. Even Mrs. Vasquez contributed, sewing new seat covers to replace the torn originals. When Mr. Alvarez came to check on the status, Elena simply told him they were exploring options and extended his use of the loaner. 10 days after the breakdown, Elena called Mr. Alvarez. "Your car is ready." When the family arrived at the garage, the entire staff stood proudly beside the Honda. It had been transformed, engine replaced, body dents smoothed, interior refurbished, even a new car seat for the toddler installed. "We can't accept this," Mrs. Alvarez whispered, recently released from the hospital and seeing the car for the first time. "It's too much." "It's not charity," Elena said firmly, echoing Julia's words to her. "It's community. We had parts we could use, skills we could share. You'll pay it forward someday." Later that week, a delivery arrived at the garage. A professional loaner fleet of 3 cars, with the Rodriguez Family Garage logo discreetly painted on the doors. The note attached read, "For your unofficial loaner program. Business investment. Not charity. The garage gets good publicity. Customers get transportation while their cars are serviced. And sometimes a family gets a lifeline. Everyone wins." J. Eleanor smiled. adding the cars to their insurance policy and official business assets. That evening, Julia called from a film set in New York. "Did the cars arrive?" she asked. "They did, thank you. Though you should know I plan to be selective. About who gets free use." "Your garage, your rules," Julia replied. "I trust your judgment. How are the boys?" "Growing too fast." Miguel made the school's advanced basketball team. They chatted easily, their friendship having evolved beyond benefactor and recipient to something more balanced. Julia shared stories from her current film. Eleanor detailed the garage's latest achievements. Before hanging up, Julia said, "You know, when I stopped to help you that night, I never imagined where it would lead. One small decision can change so much." Eleanor looked around her office at her father's photograph, at the framed business license, at the wall map now dotted with pins representing their expanding customer base. "That's the thing about kindness," she replied. "You never know how far it will reach." 1 year to the day after the fire that had destroyed Elena's home and business, a celebration was underway at Rodriguez family garage. It wasn't officially billed as an anniversary. Elena had been clear that she wanted to celebrate progress, not dwell on past tragedy, but everyone present understood the significance of the date. The garage bay doors were rolled up, creating an open space flowing into the parking lot. Tables laden with food prepared by Mrs. Vasquez and neighborhood families lined one wall. Children played basketball on the portable hoop the twins had set up, while adults mingled, talking and laughing in the warm evening air. Elena stood back, taking it all in. The garage had exceeded every projection in the business plan. They now employed 7 people full-time, including 2 graduates from the apprentice program. The Loaner Car initiative had evolved into a formal community assistance program, helping families in temporary transportation crises. Most importantly to Eleanor, she had already purchased 35% ownership of the business from Julia, well ahead of the original timeline. At this rate, she would own it outright within 3 more years. "Quite a celebration," a voice said beside her. Julia had arrived without fanfare, dressed casually with her hair pulled back. She had just returned from a film shoot in Europe and had flown directly to Los Angeles for this event. "I wasn't sure you'd make it," Elena said, hugging her friend. "I wouldn't miss it," Julia replied. 1 year is a significant milestone." They watched the twins organizing a basketball tournament, their confidence and leadership visible in how they directed even older children. "They've grown so much," Julia observed. "Not just in height," Elena agreed. "This past year, it's changed all of us." Thomas approached with a tray of empanadas. "Made by my wife," he said proudly. "Special. Recipe for special occasions." As the evening progressed, more people arrived, customers who had become friends, fellow small business owners from the neighborhood, even the Alvarez family, whose Honda was still running perfectly thanks to the team's repairs. Elena noticed Julia speaking with everyone, deflecting attention whenever someone treated her with celebrity awe, consistently redirecting conversations back to the garage and the community it served. "You're good at that," Elena commented when they found a moment alone. "Making it not about you." Julia smiled. "Years of practice. Besides, this truly isn't about me. Look around. You built this." "We built it," Elena corrected. "I never would have had the chance without you." "You would have found a way," Julia insisted. "Maybe not this exact way, but somehow. People like you always do." As the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Elena called for everyone's attention. Standing on a small platform made from storage crates, she surveyed the gathered faces, her extended family, though most weren't related by blood. "A year ago today, I thought I'd lost everything," she began. "My home, my business, my father's legacy. What I didn't realize was that legacy was never about a building or tools, or even a name on a sign. It was about the values he taught me: hard work, honesty, and helping others when you can." Elena gestured to the thriving garage around them. "What you see here isn't just my achievement. It belongs to all of us. Tomas, who believed in me enough to join this new venture. Gabriela and our team, who pour their hearts into their work every day. My amazing sons, who never stopped believing things would get better." She found Julia in the crowd, their eyes meeting briefly, and to one special friend who saw potential where others might have seen only disaster, who taught me that accepting Help doesn't mean giving up independence. It means recognizing we're all connected in this journey. Elena reached beside the platform and unveiled a plaque mounted on a stand. That's why today I'm announcing the creation of the Carlos Rodriguez Memorial Fund. Starting with a personal contribution of $25,000 from this garage's profits, this fund will help small business owners in our community recover from disasters, fires, floods, whatever life throws their way. A murmur of surprise and approval rippled through the crowd. The fund will provide interest-free loans and business mentorship, giving people what they need most, not handouts, but partnerships that respect their dignity and skills. Eleanor hadn't told Julia about this plan, and she could see the actress's genuine surprise and approval. My father used to say that kindness always finds its way back to you. A year ago I discovered how true that is, when a chance encounter on a rainy night changed everything. Now it's our turn to keep that kindness moving forward. Applause erupted as Elena stepped down. Julia approached, blinking suspiciously bright eyes. "The memorial fund is perfect," she said. "Exactly what your father and Carlos would have wanted. I have you to thank for the inspiration," Elena replied. Julia shook her head. "You were already kind and generous before we met. I just happened to be in a position to help when you needed it." As the celebration continued into the evening, Elena found herself standing in the exact spot where, 1 year ago, she had surveyed the fire damage to her father's legacy. Now she watched the twins playing basketball with the Alvarez children, Mrs. Vasquez teaching Gabriela her secret empanada recipe, and Tomas showing a neighborhood boy how to use a torque wrench. Julia joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Penny, for your thoughts." "I was just thinking about that night in the rain," Elena said, accepting the coffee. "Such a small decision, stopping to help someone with a flat tire." "The most important moments often don't announce themselves," Julia observed. "They just happen, and we only recognize their significance later." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the community that had formed around Elena's second chance. "What's next?" Julia finally asked. "Another location? Expansion?" Elena smiled. "Maybe someday. For now I'm focused on paying off my investor. I hear she's quite businesslike about these things." Julia laughed. "Terribly strict, no exceptions." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Julia and Elena walked to the parking lot, stopping beside Julia's car, the same one Elena had fixed that rainy night. "I need to get back to my hotel." "Early flight tomorrow," Julia said, embracing. "Elena, I'm proud of you, you know. Thank you for everything." After Julia left, Elena locked up the garage, her hands running affectionately over the sign bearing her family name. The twins had gone home earlier with Mrs. Vasquez, giving Elena a rare moment of solitude. She walked to her truck, the same one she'd driven to help a stranded motorist a year ago. So much had changed, yet some things remained constant. Her love for her sons, her dedication to her craft, her father's values living on through her work. As she drove home through a light evening rain, Elena thought about the countless decisions that shape a life, stopping to help someone, accepting help when offered, choosing to pass that help along to others. One small kindness on a rainy night had transformed her world. Now she was ensuring that kindness would continue to circulate, reaching people she might never meet, changing lives she might never know. Full circle, Elena thought, as she turned onto her street. And yet, not an ending, just another beginning.